Welcome, and thank you for joining us on this journey into the past. Today we will delve into a world of strength, struggle, and survival. A world of men who fought not only for glory, but for their lives. Sit back and imagine yourself returning to ancient Rome, a place of power, wealth, and, for some, unbearable suffering. The life of a gladiator was a constant struggle, where survival became the goal of each day. Imagine being one of these men, consumed by a life of training, fighting, and the inevitable threat of death. Their lives were filled with a routine of pain, brutal training, and the cold uncertainty of fate. While the rich and powerful enjoyed the luxury of Rome, gladiators were forced to endure unimaginable suffering for the entertainment of the crowd. But there's more to the story. Behind the fighting and bloodshed is a fascinating history intertwined with the names of Rome's most important figures, such as the legendary Spartacus, whose name became synonymous with resistance and rebellion. We also explore the cultural significance of the gladiatorial games, how they were used for political power, and what their decline reveals about the changing world of Rome. So, sit back and let your mind wander. Imagine what it would be like to live the life of a gladiator, experiencing the trials and tribulations of these ancient warriors. Let's begin our journey and find out why you wouldn't like the life of a Roman gladiator. In ancient Rome, the life of a gladiator was far from the idealized picture that most movies or books paint. Think about what it would be like for you if you were in their place. In a world full of cruelty, tough training, and incredible challenges, where your life depended not on your desires and aspirations, but on strength, endurance, and luck. Imagine waking up early in the morning in a small, dimly lit room that is cold and damp. There is a slight dampness on your cheeks, and your breath quickly becomes heavy in the air that smells of earth and sweat. Your eyes adjust to the dim torchlight that barely illuminates the walls. This room is not a home, just a place to sleep among many other gladiators like yourself. There are no amenities, no privacy. All you need to rest is a small straw bed that provides neither comfort nor peace. Each night, as you fall asleep, you hear sighs as heavy as your own. There is no silence here. Soon, you are awakened by a sharp sound. This is not the first and not the last. This is a signal that it is time for a new workout. Get up because the day is beginning and it will be the same as all the previous ones. Day and night, you will have only one thing: training. It will be more than just physical exercise. It will be a struggle, it will be exhaustion, and it will be a constant threat to your life. Training in the Ludi, gladiator schools is more than just entertainment. Here you are taught not only to fight, but also to survive. The training room is always noisy. The sounds of swords, shields, and rough commands from the trainers mix into one. Every blow to the metal reverberates through your body, causing your arms and back to vibrate with pain. Training puts physical and mental strain on you as you learn to use weapons and protection while maintaining concentration and calm. But despite all your efforts, you have no right to make a mistake. Every wrong step can cost you your life. As you train, your muscles become stiff and your joints become sore. Every day brings new injuries, bruises, cuts, dislocations. It's as if your whole body becomes one big wound, covered in blood and dirt. Your skin becomes tougher and rougher, and your muscles become like iron. But despite the physical suffering, your mind remains focused on one goal: to survive. This isn't just training, it's preparing for the most brutal of fights. Every trainer who works with you teaches you not only fighting techniques, but also resilience. He will not let you give up, will not allow you to feel sorry for yourself. These cruel mentors do not stop at simple training. Their goal is to prepare you to survive in the most extreme conditions. They make you an instrument, a living weapon. Sometimes their words sound like a scream, sometimes like strict orders, but they always penetrate your consciousness, making you believe that there is no other way but to fight to the end. Every day when you stand in front of the mirror, looking at your reflection, you see not only fatigue, but also fear. This is a common state for most gladiators. Fear of the arena fight, fear of death, fear that one day you may become nothing more than a corpse in the sand. And at the same time, it is a fear that you will have to learn to live with, because fear is not something that can be ignored in this world. It will be your constant companion, but not your enemy. Training in Ludi never stops. Day after day, you become more and more resilient. Your body goes through incredible tests. Every morning, when you get up and take your sword in your hands, you understand that this is not just training. This is preparation for a fight in the arena where thousands of people will watch you. This training is what separates you from survival. There is no time for thinking, only fighting and survival. As the day draws to a close, your strength is almost gone. Your body refuses to move, and your mind fights the urge to give up. But then the trainer's commanding cry sounds again, forcing you to rise again and take another step, another fight. After these training sessions, you return to the barracks. There is silence, but it is as cold as your soul. Only the most resilient can endure such a life. No matter how tired you are, there is no time to rest. Your body is your weapon, and it must be ready for battle. Such is the life of a gladiator. No rest, no peace, only endless preparation and the hope that one day maybe you will find a way to get out of this hellish circle. And so it goes, day after day. The training gets tougher, and you realize that the one who survives is not just a man, but a killing machine, hardened in the most terrible trials. The gladiator's life is not just a fight with an enemy in the arena. It is a constant fight with yourself. It is a fight for survival, to rise from the ashes every day again and again, not to become part of history, but to survive and perhaps one day become free. Imagine standing on the gladiator training grounds in the very center of the world, where survival is not just a word, but a reality that determines your every move. This is not a place for the weak. This is a place where training turns into a real fight, and every morning is a new chance to face something you could never imagine. In Ludi, the gladiator school, where you, like a killing machine, undergo grueling training, where every blow, every movement decides your fate. There is no room for weakness, for fatigue, or pity. The morning always begins with a brutal alarm clock. Not a bell, but a commanding shout from a trainer, waking you from sleep in a dark, damp room. The temperature in the room is low, and the walls feel damp from the constant humidity. Despite the fact that other gladiators are sleeping around you, it is easy to hear their heavy breathing in the darkness, mixing with the smell of sweat and moldy walls. But you have no time to rest, because in a few minutes you will have to go out to training, and only training separates you from death. Rise from your hard straw bed, feeling your joints creaking as if they can no longer work, and yet you cannot allow yourself to stop. It is not just pain, it is your daily companion, reminding you that you are alive, that you can still train. In such conditions, there is no time for awareness, only action. Your training will continue day after day, and each new day will become more brutal, and you will increasingly feel your strength ebbing. The training begins with the trainers shouting commands, and you must instantly obey their demands. But these trainings are not just physical exercise. At this point, your body becomes not just a tool, it becomes a weapon, a shield, a sword, a trident, a gladius. All this is not just a piece of equipment, but an extension of your body that will not only protect you, but also kill. In Ludi, there is no division into good and bad. Here, the only important thing is to survive. The first part of the workout is a warm-up, but it is by no means gentle. Imagine your muscles, not yet accustomed to constant strain, beginning to stretch and ache. You feel your joints groan and creak from the first movements when you begin doing basic exercises. These simple exercises become more and more difficult with each passing day. Your trainers are merciless. 10 more squats, the trainer yells, not giving you the slightest chance to catch your breath. Pain becomes an integral part of your training. The time you spend on the field passes as one endless stream of pain, sweat, and fatigue. Then the weapons training begins. Imagine your hands reaching for a shield that once seemed light, but with each new fight it becomes heavier. There is nothing in this training hall that would remind you of a friendly fight. This is a real school of survival. You are shown how to hold a shield, how to strike with a sword, how to defend and attack at the same time. Each movement is honed to perfection. Each repetition becomes a step towards your possible survival. Swords, tridents, and shields hit your hands, your body, and with each passing day these blows become more brutal. You no longer feel your body, it becomes part of this rhythm. At first it seems that your muscles simply will not withstand, but the training continues. Every day the training becomes more difficult and intense. You move from simple exercises to complex combat schemes, where you need to attack and defend at the same time, move and watch your opponent. Your trainers insist that you do not stop. Move, hit faster, your opponent does not wait. Their voices sound like commands from hell, and all you can do is follow them. With every strike of the sword, with every movement, with every step, you teach yourself to be faster, stronger, more resilient. But even at the moment when you feel most confident, the trainer shouts, "You must do it even faster," and you move again, perfecting your movements again. But that's not all. In Ludi, you don't just train with weapons. Every day there are blocks in your schedule where you must train with other gladiators. This isn't just training, it's a simulation of a real fight. Your opponents are just like you, trained and fierce, and each of them dreams of survival. They want to get into the arena just as much, and they will fight for their lives just as much. In these fights, where there are no rules and no mercy, you learn what matters most: how to find your opponent's weak spot, how to anticipate his moves, how to attack and win in the blink of an eye. Every day you become more and more resilient. Your body no longer feels like your own. It has become part of the Ludi, part of the gladiator world, where there is no concept of rest. All your muscles are filled with pain, but the pain no longer matters. Instead, it becomes your strength. Your training with other gladiators becomes more and more brutal. Blood, sweat, and pain mix in the training arena, but no one stops, no one complains. There is no place for the weak, no time for compassion. When the training finally ends, you return to your barracks, where it is as cold and damp as it was in the morning. No rest, no time to think. All you have to do is sleep, and the next morning, you have to get up again, train again, prepare again. The pain from the previous day is still in your body, but you are given no time to recover. Only hard training, only preparation for battle. This is how it goes, day after day. Your physical strength is exhausted, your muscles can barely move, but you know you have to go on. Your whole life is nothing but training for one moment, the moment when you find yourself in the arena. You can't think about anything else. Training is the only way to survive, and in this rhythm, you gradually turn into a killing machine, an instrument for the crowds to enjoy. The smells that surround you have a heavy, rich hue. In the morning, when you wake up, the first thing that fills your nostrils is a mixture of sweat, dampness, dirt, damp stone walls, and wet earth. This smell penetrates you from the very morning, creating the first feeling that today is another painful test. And the air you breathe seems heavy, as if there is something viscous in it that does not allow you to fully inhale. The smell of metal, which is felt even at the very beginning of training, literally penetrates every cell of your body, as a reminder that for you, there are no simple things. Only struggle and survival. Swords, shields, weapons that you hold in your hands are saturated with this smell. It is in their every bend, in every scratch, in every prick of metallic sharpness, that does not leave you a chance to relax. In moments of training, when your hands slide over the cold metal surface of the sword, or when the shield heavily repels the blow of your partner, you feel not only physical resistance, but also the aura of the very metal that serves as your protection and weapon. This metal, now a part of you, seems to connect with the skin, with the muscles, with the nerves, creating not just a feeling of strength, but also a cold horror of how close death is. Each blow is a test of strength, endurance, and determination. Noise is another important perception in this world. When you step onto the training field, the entire environment becomes filled with sound. At first, everything is silent, but as soon as you start moving, you hear that characteristic sound of swords scraping against each other. Your ears begin to be filled with a wave of many different sounds: swords striking, shields clashing, the sharp shouts of the trainers, the sounds of your comrades breathing. But among all this, what is important to you is not the shouts of the trainer. It is not the exhalations of your friends, but the sound of your own breathing, which becomes heavier and heavier, as if you are trying to get air in this unbearable, closed world. Your breathing accelerates, it becomes shallow and intermittent. At this point, your ears are filled with only this sound, which becomes not just a sound, it becomes a part of your existence. Training sessions that take place under the supervision of strict trainers are often accompanied by strict orders. Their voices, reminiscent of a command, seem to force you to move faster, to be smarter, to become more resilient. These orders sound harsh, as if tearing you away from the very essence of your being. But these commands become the fulcrums that force you to move forward. They penetrate your consciousness, not allowing you to relax, not allowing the slightest weakness. These shouts become almost physical sensations, sharp, piercing, as if you could not ignore them. They are like sharp knives, forcing you to take another step, another move, another attack. These are not just shouts. This is your present. This is a part of your world that never ends. The sensory experience of movement and body sensations is another important perception that becomes part of your existence. Every moment your muscles tense, every step you take, every blow, your body is filled with a feeling of pain and tension. But this pain is not just pain. It is a pain that fills you with determination. It is what makes you go forward. Every blow, every movement becomes palpable in your body. Your back hurts when you bend it, when you take a weapon in your hands. Your thighs begin to ache from the tension when you stand in a fighting stance, when you wait for the next move, when your eyes, focusing on your opponent, see his every move, his every breath. But even in this constant experience of pain, in your body that seems about to give in, a strange feeling of strength appears. It is a strength that does not allow you to give in. It is a strength that makes you continue to go forward. And so, when the moment of real combat arrives, each of you, each gladiator, begins to feel how his body and mind begin to work not in one direction, but as a single mechanism. This is not just training. This is a real arena, a real fight for survival. In such moments, you feel how fear penetrates your consciousness. And it is not just there. It penetrates your body, making your heart beat faster, and the blood circulate faster. And at the same time, you feel how your muscles begin to work automatically, how instincts take over. All your training experience, all the struggle, every look and every gesture lead you to this moment. In the moment of collision with the enemy, everything else disappears, to stay alive or to die. This is the only choice that exists. And despite the fact that fear is inside you, your arms and legs perform all the movements automatically. Your eyes follow your opponent's every move. You register his slightest actions, his reactions to your blows, his steps. Everything around you seems to slow down, and each moment seems like an eternity. In this fight, you feel how the tension reaches its peak, how with each blow, you become more and more a part of this cruel world. When your swords clash, when the shield bounces off the blow, you feel the metallic sound penetrate your teeth, your body. It is not just a sound, it is a blow that reminds you that death is always near, that every moment can be your last. The unbearable weight of this experience is felt in every breath you take, in every movement you make. In the arena or in the training room, you become part of this brutal symphony of pain and fear. But there is more to this pain. It is your determination. It is your survival. It is your spirit that does not allow you to give up. And even though the pain and fear overwhelm your consciousness, you keep moving. You keep fighting, because here in this world, only you can decide who will come out alive. Imagine being transported to a completely different reality, leaving behind the training fields and gladiator barracks. In this new world, absolute luxury reigns, where the grandeur of Rome is personified in golden columns, marble palaces, soft carpets, and decorations that constantly reflect the light of torches. This world is completely different from the one you just found yourself in. There is no brutal training, no endless death, no pain that the cruel reality of the ludi brings every day. The Roman elite is a world filled with exquisite pleasures, wealth, and high ambitions. Sounds of this world, completely different. Here you don't hear the clanging of swords. You don't feel the tramp of feet and the blows of weapons, as on the training field. Here, music reigns, the sounds of flutes and lutes, the sounds of rich and poetic conversations, sounding in their own way, like poems that flow elegantly in the air. These sounds are filled with serenity. They soothe and invite you to rest, not to fight. Every moment in this world reminds you that here, you should not fight for survival. You should enjoy life. However, this external serenity hides the same brutal internal struggles that take place behind closed doors. The picture you see is radically different from what surrounded you in Ludi. Spacious rooms covered with exquisite carpets, high columns, golden decorations, frescoes depicting mythological creatures and scenes. All this reminds of the power and grandeur of Rome. Every detail of the palace, from the chairs to the windows, is filled with symbols of power, luxury, and wealth. But behind all this, there is a game in which each guest is not just a participant in the fun, but a figure on the political chessboard. The people who live here enjoy endless banquets, celebrations, and social events, where they discuss not only the latest news from Rome, but also the intrigues and political manipulations that define their lives. This life is not as free of pressure and struggle as it seems at first glance. In the world of Rome's elite, there are no sword fights, but there is a struggle for influence, for a place in society, for relationships with the emperor and the senators. Here, too, people wage wars. Only instead of blood and battles, they use words, diplomatic maneuvers, and personal connections. These nobles often spent their days in political games and manipulations. If you spend time among the Roman elite, you will notice how everything is built on complex political alliances, family unions, promises that must be kept, and conspiratorial meetings that always remain secret. Every day is a new chance to strengthen your position, to win a small victory in this huge political field. Politics was a game in which everyone participated, from the most influential senators to wealthy merchants and even famous artists. Every step, every word mattered here. And although this life is filled with external luxury, inside it is full of cruelty, hidden behind the visible surface. Consider for a moment the banquets that these great houses hosted. Each gathering was carefully orchestrated to showcase the wealth of the hosts, as well as their social standing. The tables groaned with exotic fare, meats from the far corners of the empire, fruits from all over the world, fresh fish prepared according to recipes from the most respected culinary schools. Golden goblets filled with wine shimmered, their golden handles sparkling in the torchlight. Guests were served exotic dishes that could sometimes cost a fortune, and it was at these banquets that the fate of Rome was decided. But beneath the splendor lay intrigue, bribery, and hidden ambition. Each guest knew that his behavior at such an event was not only a matter of manners, but also a chance to secure a political victory. Gorgeous clothes and jewelry. These were not just symbols of wealth. They were part of the game, part of the elite strategy itself. Noble Romans wore clothes decorated with gold threads, precious stones, and intricate patterns that reflected not only their status, but also their ability to manipulate public opinion. With every gesture, with every glance, they showed how they could control the situation. Clothes and jewelry became not just external attributes, but also part of their struggle for status. These people may have radiated greatness, but they also lived in a world where every movement, word, and glance had enormous significance. However, despite the outward grandeur, there were also unforgivable cruelties in the lives of the Roman elite. Beneath the veil of luxury and pleasure lay brutal political battles. Friends at these banquets could become enemies, and families united by alliances often collapsed in the struggle for power. In these luxurious palaces, battles took place just as well. Only the weapons were hidden, and their actions were not seen by the eyes of ordinary people. They fought not with swords, but with words, persuasion, intrigue, and betrayal. In the life of the Roman elite, as in the world of gladiators, there was a struggle, not for survival in the physical sense, but to be first, to have influence, to hold the power of Rome in their hands. And despite the fact that their life was surrounded by all possible pleasures and luxury, they were not free from constant danger. The danger of not being seen, not being heard, not being at the center of political intrigue. But if we consider the life of gladiators and the life of the elite of Rome, it is clear that their struggle was different. Gladiators fought for their lives every day. It was a physical struggle in which every blow, every movement decided who would live and who would die. They could not afford to relax. They could not find solace in banquets or political manipulation. Their lives were completely devoted to the struggle for survival. And the life of the Roman elite was full of luxury, exquisite pleasures, and hidden intrigues. There was no physical combat, but there was a brutal struggle for status, for influence, for the right to rule this world. There was little room for weakness, but the weakness was psychological, not physical. Elite Romans were forced to live in a constant struggle for their position in society, and their political manipulations often brought no less pain and fear than the fights in the arena. When we think of gladiators, the first thought that comes to mind is the arena battles, where these brave warriors face off in mortal combats in front of thousands of spectators. But what does a fight in the arena really mean for a gladiator? It is not just a fight. It is a moment when every step can be the last. It is a place where everything is decided in a few minutes, where life and death are in a single moment. And victory does not always lie in physical strength. It also depends on the mind, on the ability to survive and adapt to conditions that change every moment. Every fight in the arena is a moment of fear, adrenaline, determination, and internal struggle. For a gladiator, a fight is not just a fight for victory, it is a fight for life. In many cases, even if he wins, he can be killed at the same moment if the crowd decides otherwise. The crowd is the second main player in the arena. They decide who lives and who dies. Their demands and decisions can be senseless and cruel, but for a gladiator, this is an inescapable reality. Imagine you are standing in front of a crowd. The spectators are close, their faces alight with greedy interest, their eyes burning with the thirst for blood and spectacle. These people have come to the arenas to see the battle. Their moods can change as quickly as the fights. One moment, they can be delighted with your skill, the way you beat your enemy, and the next, they can demand your death if they feel that you are not showing enough strength or fury. The arena area seems enormous when you stand in the center, surrounded by wild, merciless spectators who watch, hands unclasped, ready to scream, demanding a victim. There is no compassion in their eyes, no regrets. All they want is blood. Your body to them is nothing more than an object to be used for their own pleasure. And so, you enter the arena. The walls of the Colosseum, filled with the noise of the crowd, begin to fall silent as you enter the center. The sand beneath your feet feels cold and hard, but you don't feel it because all your focus is on your opponent. Every step requires effort. Every breath feels like a knife in your chest. With each movement, you feel your body begin to work at maximum capacity. Fear paralyzes, but it is the fear that you must control, the fear that will save you. The beat of your heart echoes in your head. Your mind calculates every possible move, every decision you must make. Time in the arena slows down. The sand, your swords, your shields, all this becomes part of this moment, and it will remain forever in your memory. Your opponent, this is not just a person. This is another gladiator, just like you, with the same chances of death and survival. He also went through Ludi. He also underwent the most brutal training, and now, like you, he is forced to fight for his life. But at the same time, he can be your friend, a comrade with whom you trained, or, on the contrary, an enemy whose presence causes even more fear inside you. Your life now depends on how you act in this fight. Your opponent's eyes read his determination, but you see this determination in yourself, the same reflection of the fight for survival. With each move, you try to predict what he will do in the next moment to survive. The whole arena becomes a field for strategy. There is no room for impulsive decisions. Every step you take, every movement of your body must be thought out. When your weapon meets his shield, you feel not only physical resistance, but also an emotional struggle. This is the moment when you need to control your pain so as not to be distracted from your goal. You understand that even if you get wounded, your body must continue to act, no matter how much it protests. This is a fight not only with your opponent, but also with your own body, with its fatigue, with its pain. Every strike with a sword and every block with a shield is not just a physical action, but also psychological tension. It is a battle not only with an external enemy, but also with yourself. At this moment, you must cast aside everything human, pain, fatigue, fear. All this must be suppressed to the very bottom. Every step, every blow is not just a movement. It is a decision about life and death. And so, when you deliver your next blow, you understand that this can be decisive. Your hands slide over the weapon. Each swing of the sword is heavy, but decisive. Your muscles ache, but they move without stopping. Each moment becomes an eternity. The crowd approves or demands blood. And then comes the moment when you see in the eyes of the audience that very gesture that can be deadly. This is the moment when your life is in their hands. Do they like the way you fight, or do they decide that you are not worthy of victory? This moment will be decisive. It is important not only to defeat the opponent, but also to maintain the spectacle, to make an impression, to win their approval. And then, when that moment comes, the moment when either you or your opponent falls, you feel your body fill with fear. It is the fear of the end, the fear that you will not survive this moment. When the fight is over and you walk out of the arena, dead or alive, it feels like you've lived a lifetime in those few minutes. Everything around you begins to fade. Do you return to the Ludi to train again? Or is death already close, taking your comrade's soul? The feeling of restlessness and pain remains in your body, in every joint, in every pore of your skin. But that is the reality of being a gladiator, and that experience will never leave you. Shastas, the main battle in the arena, it is not just a fight. It is not just a battle for life and death. It is the moment when not only the fate of the gladiator is decided, but also his soul, his essence, fear, pain, thirst for survival. All this becomes part of this endless cycle. Every battle in the arena is not just a movement of the body, but also a movement of the mind when decisions about life or death are made in an instant. All this is incredible cruelty, survival, and an endless struggle that turns each moment in the arena into a story behind thousands of others. Spartacus is a name that has become a symbol of resistance, of the fight for freedom and survival. His story spans not only the brutal battles of the arena, but also the great rebellion that shook the Roman Empire, the Spartacus Revolt. He was not just a gladiator, he became a leader who rebelled against an entire system that was set up to oppress slaves, to brutally suppress and exploit people for fun and power. But how did he become such a symbol? How did he go from being a simple gladiator to the leader of an army of slaves, armed with the determination to gain freedom? Spartacus's early years remain largely dark and foggy. Historians still cannot say with certainty where he came from, or even the exact date of his birth. However, there are many theories that Spartacus was either a Thracian or a Macedonian. Born in a region that was at the crossroads of several civilizations, he was exposed to the brutality of life from a very early age. While the Thracians lived in the mountainous regions of the Balkans, often involved in conflicts and battles, Spartacus found himself from the very beginning in a world where brutality was a part of life, and freedom was just a dream. First meeting with Rome took place not on the battlefield, but in captivity. Spartacus was captured by Roman troops while serving as a soldier in his native region. He was captured, but despite this, he became part of the Roman slave system. The Romans, being no less cruel to prisoners than to gladiators themselves, turned Spartacus into a gladiator. And like others like him, he was sent to a gladiator school to train and fight in the arena. Training in the Ludi, gladiator school, were brutal. They were days filled with physical pain, fear of imminent death, and attempts to survive among colleagues who were no less desperate. Spartacus, despite the fact that he found himself in extremely difficult conditions, was a man of extraordinary determination. With each passing day, he became more physically resilient, and his mental abilities sharpened. He understood that in order to survive, he needed not only to be strong, but also to think strategically. Training in the arena was not just a way for him to avoid death, it became his school of survival. As a gladiator, Spartacus fought and won, but his excitement and desire to fight the system did not stop. Roman gladiators were not just slaves, they were instruments of spectacle, pawns whose lives depended on the mood of the crowd and the decisions of their masters. And like many gladiators, Spartacus, given into an inner desire, began to dream of freedom, of one day being able to step outside these walls and reclaim his independence. When Spartacus found himself in the Ludi of Capua, which became his temporary home, there was talk among the gladiators of a possible rebellion. In 73 BC, Spartacus and about 70 gladiators organized an escape from the school. Armed with kitchen knives, they broke free, seizing weapons that allowed them to become a powerful resistance to the Roman authorities. The rebellion began small. Spartacus's early successes were not achieved through force, but through cunning and determination. The 70 gladiators attracted more followers every day. From slaves oppressed on plantations to people seeking liberation from Rome's rule, the rebellion grew in strength. In many ways, it was a revolution not just against Roman slavery, but against an entire system that oppressed and destroyed the lives of thousands. What happened during moments of victory and defeat? Each victory was a ritual of resistance. Each battle confirmed that Spartacus was not simply fighting for his freedom. He had become a symbol of all the oppressed, all those who were forced to remain silent, to submit, to hide their pain, their frustration, their rage. His army grew every day, and soon he had an army of up to 120,000 men under his command. The key moment in the history of the uprising was that Spartacus not only led the battle, but also showed the world that a former slave could become not only a leader, but also a strategist. He was not a slave to his own rage. He was a strategist with a clear plan, who knew how to exploit the weaknesses of the enemy and how to attract new forces to his side. Despite his huge army, Spartacus knew that his success depended on the decision he made at this moment. His determination to lead an army of slaves to freedom stood against all of Rome. As the rebel slaves won victory after victory, the question of what to do next became increasingly pressing. Spartacus was faced with internal contradictions. On the one hand, he was a warrior leading his army to freedom. On the other, he knew he was facing one of the most powerful armies in the world, and Rome would not give up easily. Spartacus wanted to lead his men south to Syria, where they might find a safer exit, but his army was torn apart by disagreements about the path to take. Rome finally came up with an answer. After several years of fighting, the Roman legions under Marcus Licinius Crassus and later Pompey were victorious. In 71 BC, Spartacus's troops were defeated. Spartacus himself died in battle, and his body was never found. The uprising was suppressed, but it left an indelible mark on history. Spartacus became a symbol of the struggle for freedom, for a dignified life, for the right to resist. Spartacus's legacy is not only a memory of the great gladiator who led the slave rebellion, but also a symbol of how any person, regardless of their position, can stand up and fight for their freedom. Spartacus has become part of the myth, a symbol for all those who seek justice and freedom. In his story, there lives the hope that even in the darkest times, you can find the strength to fight, that even in the face of death, you can stand up for your freedom. Spartacus will forever remain in history as not just a gladiator, but as a leader, a symbol of resistance and a shining example of fortitude. His name has become an integral part of what it means to be a free man, a man who was ready to go to the end despite everything. Spartacus was not born a great leader. His journey was filled with hardships, struggles, and suffering. It was not just a story of how he became a gladiator, but also how a man who found himself on the lowest rung of the social ladder could transform himself into a leader and lead the largest slave rebellion in the history of ancient Rome. Its origin remains a mystery to historians, as the exact details of his early life are lost to the centuries. According to one version, Spartacus was originally from Thrace, a region in what is now the Balkan Peninsula. It was a violent and warlike region where people were hardened by constant conflict. He may have been part of a local tribe that took part in military actions against Rome. Another version of the story says that Spartacus may have been a slave captured by Roman troops during one of their expansions. However, one way or another, at some point he was captured, and his life changed dramatically. After his capture, Spartacus was sold into slavery, and his fate led him to the gladiator school in Capua, where long years of brutal training awaited him. In this hell, where death was always near, he turned out to be not just one of the slaves, but one of the most persistent, strong, and determined fighters. His ability to survive in such conditions, his tenacity and perseverance began to stand out among other gladiator slaves. But, most importantly, Spartacus was not just another gladiator. His inner spirit and determination fought not only against physical pain, but also against the conditions he found himself in. The training in the Ludi, gladiator school, was brutal and merciless. Within these stone walls, Spartacus was forced to submit, but despite all the bullying and humiliation, he increasingly realized that his fate, like the fate of the other gladiators, was unfair. This training turned them into living weapons for the amusement of the crowd. But at some point, Spartacus realized that fighting in the arena was not his place, and his place was in the fight for freedom, for the right to live. Everyday life in a gladiator school was filled with cruelty not only from the trainers, but also from the gladiators themselves, who, like Spartacus, understood that life in the arena could be their last. At some point, Spartacus realized that the only way to survive was to rebel, take away his freedom, and give other gladiators a chance to live. But before taking any steps, Spartacus waited and observed the situation. He realized that he needed to become not just a part of this world, but its true leader, a person who would lead the others into battle. The key point Spartacus's rise was not only due to his physical superiority, but also to his ability to think strategically. Unlike most gladiators who were focused on fighting in the arena, Spartacus began to think about how to use his powers to fight for freedom. He began to influence other gladiators, inspiring them to fight back. Soon, despite the fact that life in the Ludi seemed hopeless, he began to gather followers around him who were also willing to fight. When the moment of escape came, Spartacus and about 70 gladiators organized a revolt in Capua, using their knowledge and skills to escape from captivity. They seized weapons and managed to defeat the guards, and then moved towards the south, igniting the idea of freedom among other slaves. This was the moment that became a turning point in his life. It was then that he realized that he could be not just a gladiator, but a leader, a man who would lead an army of slaves and march against Rome. As soon as they started moving south, their forces began to grow. The rebellious slaves joined Spartacus's army. Every day their army grew, and soon it consisted of tens of thousands of people who came not only for freedom, but also for the idea of resisting the system that oppressed them. Spartacus became the symbol of this rebellion. He not only led the army, but also became the most important figure for all the slaves who were under the yoke of Roman power. But Spartacus was more than just a warrior. His rise to leadership is also a story of strategic wisdom. He understood that to win, he needed to use not just his physical strength, but also his ability to think several steps ahead. He began training his soldiers, gladiators, slaves in the basics of warfare. They became not just a mass, but an army capable of striking at Roman garrisons. Every victory, every step forward strengthened his status. Spartacus could have turned his army north to Gallia or to Syria, where he was offered refuge, but his army could not agree on a common goal. As a result, this internal division played a role in the tragedy. Spartacus found himself in an incredibly difficult situation, facing two problems: the Roman army, which was becoming more powerful, and the internal dissension among his army. At some point, Spartacus made the decision to continue the fight and not retreat, despite the enormous threat. The turning point. What was so special about his rise was that his army was not just fighting for survival, it was fighting for freedom. Spartacus became the embodiment of hope for the slaves and the oppressed, for those who were denied the right to their own lives. His rebellion became a symbol of the struggle for justice and freedom. For thousands of slaves, Spartacus became a leader who showed them the way. This rebellion was not just a physical fight, it was a fight for dignity, for human rights. When the Roman Empire faced this rebellion, she found herself in a difficult situation. The Roman legions, even the most experienced, were forced to confront these former slaves who were fighting not for gold or wealth, but for their freedom. Spartacus's rebellion lasted for several years, and although it was eventually suppressed, its significance and influence remain in history. Spartacus has forever gone down in history as a symbol of the fight for freedom and equality. The rise of Spartacus is the story of a man who rose from the lowest strata of society to become not only a symbol of resistance, but also a leader whose name will be associated with the fight for freedom, justice, and human rights. His path is the path from a gladiator, a victim of the system, to a leader who was able to challenge the most powerful empire of his time. Spartacus's rebellion was one of the most significant and dramatic events in the history of ancient Rome, but it was also a great tragedy for those involved. This fight for freedom, led by a gladiator who became a leader, shook the foundations of the Roman Empire. However, despite its determination and brilliant strategy, Spartacus's rebellion was eventually crushed, leaving behind only the memory of what could have been a symbol of the victory of the oppressed. The beginning of the uprising, it was a moment that could be called the spark of revolution. When Spartacus and 70 gladiators escaped from the gladiator school in Capua in 73 BC, they became a symbol of resistance for all slaves in Rome. From the very beginning, their numbers grew. At first, they were a few dozen people, but soon they were joined by thousands of plantation slaves, peasants, and people eager for freedom and better living conditions. Although they began as a group of fugitives, their actions attracted a lot of attention, and it soon became clear that this rebellion would not just be a fight for freedom, it would be a real challenge to the Roman Empire itself. The Roman Empire was in horror, learning of the uprising. The rebel slaves led by Spartacus had already managed to capture several small towns, which showed Rome that this army, although it had started as a group of fugitives, now represented a real threat. Rome responded decisively to the challenge, sending its legions to suppress the uprising. However, in the initial stages of the battle, the rebels led by Spartacus won victory after victory. Their numbers continued to grow, and soon they became a real army that could challenge the most trained Roman troops. The tragedy of the uprising was not only that it was doomed to failure, but also in the way events unfolded. The Roman leadership, which had initially underestimated the threat, was now faced with an unstoppable force of slaves who began to fight not only for survival, but also for freedom, for the chance to free themselves from slavery and oppression. Rome sent experienced generals to suppress the rebellion, among them Marcus Licinius Crassus, who became Spartacus's main opponent. Crassus initially faced difficulty in dealing with the rebellious slaves. However, despite temporary defeats of the Roman troops, Spartacus's army was no match for Rome's army in numbers, and victory would require more than just courage and determination. Spartacus's mistakes and internal contradictions in his army were decisive for the final outcome. Spartacus, despite all his strategic talents and outstanding fighting ability, faced the difficulty of managing an army that consisted of different people: slaves, peasants, former soldiers, and gladiators. Dissension began within his troops. Some of his allies began to express doubts about Spartacus's strategy. One of these moments was his decision not to move south to Syria, where his army could have found refuge, but instead to continue the fight against Rome. This decision played a fatal role in the collapse of the rebellion. Tragic choice. Spartacus was committed to the idea of resistance and freedom. Although the army of slaves grew stronger every day, their strength was weakened by disagreements about the future path. Spartacus believed in continuing the fight, but his supporters began to doubt the legitimacy of this path. Trying to maintain unity, Spartacus decided to move north. But at this point, the Roman army grew stronger and began to select more experienced commanders to finally suppress the rebellion. The turning point came when the Romans under the command of Crassus, a strategic counterattack was launched. The Roman legions, now better armed and trained, began to strike at Spartacus's army with precision, using a discipline and tactics that the rebellious slaves lacked. Eventually, Crassus, with the help of his troops, was able to encircle Spartacus's army, making escape impossible. Spartacus faced an army that, despite its numbers, could not continue to fight such an opponent. Battle of Sylvia, 73 BC, was Spartacus's last hope. It was not just a life-and-death battle. It was decisive for the fate of the entire slave army. Spartacus took on the huge Roman forces, but even with all his determination and courage, the slave army was weakened both morally and physically. This battle was the culmination of the rebellion, and despite moments of success, the Roman army proved too strong. When the Roman troops broke through the rebel lines, panic broke out among the slaves. Many of them fled, but could not escape pursuit. Spartacus, trying to organize a final counterattack, was killed in battle. His body was never found, and this uncertainty left a tragic veil over his end. After the defeat of the uprising, Spartacus's army was dispersed, and the remaining rebels were killed or re-enslaved. Thousands of slaves who were part of this movement were killed, and those who survived fell under the brutal rule of Rome once again. Despite this, Spartacus's rebellion left an indelible mark on history. His name became synonymous with the fight for freedom, for the right to resist oppression. Even despite the tragic outcome, Spartacus remained a symbol of those who are ready to fight to the end. The tragedy of Spartacus's rebellion was that it was doomed to defeat, not because Spartacus was a bad leader, but because his army did not have the strategic and organizational resources to withstand such a powerful enemy as Rome. However, even in defeat, Spartacus's rebellion became an example of heroism, striving for freedom and unbending will. This event will forever remain in memory, as a symbol of the struggle for the rights and freedoms of the oppressed, as an act of courage against the most brutal forces. Spartacus versus Rome, the rebellion and its tragedy, is a story not only about military strategy and battles. It is a story about people who were ready to sacrifice themselves for freedom, about how the dream of a better life can lead to the greatest sacrifices and, ultimately, to a tragic fall. In the end, this tragedy became a lesson for all future generations, a reminder that resistance can be great, but without wisdom and unity, the path to victory can be almost impossible. Gladiators, as we know, were the main figures in the arena, but behind each fighter, there was more than just a spectacle figure. These men, some prisoners, others volunteers, endured terrible conditions and repeated battles that left an indelible mark on their bodies and perhaps on their souls. Today, with the help of archaeology, we can gain a unique insight into how gladiators lived, the wounds they suffered, the weapons they used, and the conditions they lived in. Archaeological research in recent decades has shed light on aspects of gladiator life that we could only guess at before. Archaeological excavations of gladiators' graves, not only in Italy, but also in other parts of the Roman Empire, where gladiators often fought and where their graves remained. One of the most famous finds was the gladiator tomb of San Marcello, located near the ancient Roman city of Capua. This find was a real discovery for archaeologists. as it allowed to shed light on many details of the gladiators' lives and showed that they were not just slaves, but also people who could survive many years of fighting and trials. In some cases, their graves were located next to the cemeteries of ordinary Romans, which suggests that gladiators, despite their social role, received at least partial respect in the society that used them. When archaeologists examined these graves, they found many interesting objects. The weapons used by gladiators, such as swords, tridents, helmets, shields, and other pieces of equipment, provide us with a unique insight into how they fought and what tactics they used. The weapons found near the gladiators' bodies were distinguished by their high-quality craftsmanship and individual features. Swords were often wrapped in leather or fabric to improve grip, and helmets had elongated and refined shapes designed to protect the head and neck. Some finds show that gladiators used not only weapons in battle, but also various types of protection, such as heavy shields that could absorb blows, allowing fighters to survive the fight unless they were mortally wounded. Physiological signs of injury gladiators have also become the focus of scientists' attention. When examining the remains, archaeologists discovered that many of them suffered from multiple injuries typical of regular fighting. For example, gladiators often had broken ribs, indicating that they were frequently hit in the body. These fractures were the result of repeated blows, and archaeologists believe that for gladiators with this type of injury, returning to battle meant only one thing: a readiness to face a new threat and continue their battles. Gladiators often suffered injuries that healed, but left traces in their bodies for life. Sometimes, finds indicate damage to joints, especially the shoulder and elbow, which could indicate that gladiators, despite their injuries, were forced to continue fighting. Scars, injuries, and traces of treatment found on the bones of gladiators tell us about the brutality with which they endured their fights. Some bone remains show that many gladiators underwent surgical interventions in order to continue their service. For example, traces of surgical operations such as amputations or treatment of damaged bones were found. These operations, carried out without anesthesia, were extremely difficult, but they allowed the gladiator to return to the arena and continue to fight for his life. However, the most amazing discoveries relate to the lives of gladiators outside the arena. Archaeologists have found graves that contain not only the remains, but also evidence of how gladiators lived their daily lives. While many gladiators spent their days training as slaves, there were also those who used their powers to fight for personal dignity and to improve their situation. Gladiators' burials sometimes included objects such as amulets or symbols of protection, indicating that they hoped for salvation or the protection of the gods. Such objects may have served as personal talismans, helping gladiators cope with the mental anguish and pain that became an integral part of their lives. Even more important are the findings, which concern the social status of gladiators. Archaeologists have found that gladiators were often buried in separate graves, which were different from those of ordinary slaves. In some cases, their graves were located in areas where wealthier citizens of Rome lived. This may indicate that, despite their low social status, gladiators enjoyed some respect, especially if they demonstrated bravery or achieved success in combat. But not all gladiator graves were so honorable. Many were buried in mass graves, in which there was no sign of respect for their lives. This supports the idea that most gladiators were seen by society as mere tools for entertainment and destruction. Injuries and deaths of gladiators were closely related to the conditions in which they lived. The poor living conditions in the ludi and the endless training that made them ever more resilient and strong also had an impact on their physical condition. Wounds associated with combat injuries often left traces that could be observed even after death. But along with this, archaeological finds show that gladiators were often subjected to psychological trauma associated with the constant threat of death. This is confirmed by the fact that signs of constant stress in the body caused by constant fears and difficult conditions are found on bones and in graves. Weapons used by gladiators also deserves attention. The graves often contain a variety of weapons that they used: short swords, tridents, chains, and other tools. What makes these tools unique is their design. They were created not only for effective combat, but also for survival in the brutal reality of the arena. Some items were placed in the graves with special attention, indicating their importance in the life of a gladiator. They were not just tools for killing, but part of their identity and ability to survive. Modern research and new excavation methods give us more and more information about the life of gladiators. With each new discovery, archaeologists can reconstruct the picture of their existence and understand what was hidden behind these brutal fights and spectacles. These studies show not only the terrible conditions in which gladiators lived, but also how they were forced to fight, not only with external enemies, but also with themselves, with pain and fear. And unforgettable. Secret graves of gladiators provide us with a unique insight into history and how these arena heroes really lived. These archaeological discoveries provide us with clues to their lives and deaths, and show that each gladiator was not just a weapon in the arena, but a person suffering from physical and psychological trauma, who fought not only for glory, but also for his life. The gladiators' weapons were more than just the tools they used to fight in the arena. They were their primary means of survival, a tool that determined not only their fate, but also their chances of winning. Each sword, each shield, each weapon had its own purpose, its own unique design that was aimed not only at killing, but also at surviving in a world where life and death depended on how skillfully they used their weapons. We will look at how the different types of gladiator weapons not only helped them fight, but also played a role in their physical and mental preparation for battle. Gladiators were weapons in the hands of the mob, and their lives depended entirely on how they used their tools, how they fought, and how they survived. Their weapons were not mere paraphernalia. They were extensions of their bodies, their thoughts, and their wills. The weapons became their personal power, and their only chance of survival in a world where only the victors could be left alive. Now, main types of gladiator weapons. Gladius, the most famous and well-known sword of gladiators. This sword became a symbol of Rome, and its main purpose was to effectively kill an opponent in close combat. Gladius was a short sword, approximately 60 to 85 centimeters long, with a straight blade, ideal for a quick and accurate strike at point-blank range. The convenience of its use was that the gladiator could hold it with one hand, leaving the other free to use a shield or protection. However, the gladius was not only a weapon of attack, but also of defense. Due to its compact size, it allowed the gladiator to maneuver in close combat, where a quick attack and defense were crucial. This weapon did not simply serve to kill, it was an instrument of death and survival at the same time. Many gladiators used the gladius to protect their weak points, making quick and accurate strikes on living targets, while avoiding counterattacks. Trident. This weapon was often used by gladiators known as rhetoricians or fishermen. The trident was a symbol of the sea god Poseidon, and its design symbolized the element of water, but it was also extremely effective for fighting in the arena. The trident had 3 points, which allowed the gladiator to attack and keep his opponent at bay. Despite its length and bulk, this weapon allowed the gladiator to attack from a safe distance, while simultaneously deflecting his attacks from possible counterattacks. This weapon was designed not only to wound, but also to control the battlefield. Using a trident, a gladiator could pull his opponent out of his stance, grab his weapon, or even use the tip to catch his opponent by his helmet or shield. This weapon, despite its initial clumsiness, was a symbol of ingenuity and adaptability in the arena. Shield. The gladiator's shield was not just a defense, but also an important element of his combat tactics. The shield was relatively large and heavy, which allowed the gladiator not only to protect himself from enemy blows, but also to actively use it as a weapon in combat. For example, when blocking a blow, the gladiator could instantly turn the shield into an attack, pushing the enemy with it or knocking him down. It was a weapon that often played a decisive role in a fight, allowing him to gloriously resist any attack. The shield was also often used to open up space for further attacks. It was their barrier, but also a tool for maneuver. The way a gladiator used his shield affected not only his defense, but also his ability to counterattack. Palika. A stick used by gladiators in training, but sometimes it became a weapon for attack. This weapon was a long wooden pole with a metal tip. Palika was used in combat as a means of controlling the enemy. A gladiator could use it to move the fight to his territory, dodging a blow, not giving his opponent a chance to attack. This weapon, with due force and accuracy, could break bones, knock down, and create a real threat to the enemy. Double-edged sword. This weapon was typical for gladiators who fought alone, without support. The double-edged sword was very convenient for striking from both sides, posing a threat from any angle. It was short enough to be maneuverable, but also sharp enough to cut through the enemy's defense and deliver a fatal blow. Tactics and use of weapons. Every weapon the gladiators used was designed not only to kill, but also to survive in the arena. A gladiator could not afford to make a mistake, could not afford to be clumsy. Each weapon was designed in such a way that the battle lasted only a few minutes, but it was in these minutes that the fate of each fighter was decided. Discipline and mastery of the weapon were crucial to survival, and gladiators spent years training to become perfect masters of their craft. The role of weapons in psychological preparation. For gladiators, their weapons were more than just a tool of combat. They were a symbol of their fight for survival. Many gladiators saw their swords and shields not just as objects, but as a part of themselves. Knowing how to use weapons quickly and effectively gave them not only a physical advantage, but also psychological confidence in combat. Success in the arena depended on a gladiator's ability to recognize his opponent's weaknesses in time, use the power of his weapons with maximum efficiency, and control his emotions in the heat of battle. Technical features of weapons. Additionally, gladiators' weapons had their own unique characteristics. For example, the gladius was sharpened so that its blade would remain sharp even after many battles. The trident was designed in such a way that its tip would not only effectively pierce the body, but also leave a wound in it through which it was impossible to pull the weapon out without significant damage. Each weapon was designed for maximum effectiveness in the brutal combat conditions of the arena. Every moment when a gladiator pulled out his weapon was an important decision, as this moment could be decisive for his survival. Gladiators' weapons, these are not just metals and trees. They were extensions of their body and spirit, their instruments of survival and death. In the world of gladiators, where every fight was a test of life, weapons not only allowed them to survive, but also became part of their self-identification. These objects, created for battle, symbolize not only a historical era, but also deep philosophical reflections on strength, resilience, and the human will to live. Gladiatorial games were more than just bloody spectacles for the crowd. These large-scale events became an integral part of the political and social life of ancient Rome. They played a multifaceted role in strengthening the power of the ruling elites, maintaining order and control, and manipulating public opinion. In Rome, gladiatorial games were not just a form of entertainment, but also highly organized political and cultural events designed to achieve entire political goals. From their earliest days in the arena, the games became a vital instrument of power that rulers used to strengthen their popularity and control the masses. Gladiator games as a tool of mass control and legitimization of power. When Rome's ruling elites faced challenges from political opposition or popular unrest, they recognized the need to maintain their status and popularity among the people. To their aid came the gladiatorial games, mass spectacles that served to distract public attention from social problems, political crises, and internal conflicts. The idea was simple: bread and circuses, providing the people with entertainment so that they would forget their troubles and focus on an event that they perceived as part of Rome's greatness. These spectacles became a form of populism. Politicians, nobles, and emperors used gladiatorial games to demonstrate their generosity and concern for the people, creating the illusion that they were providing welfare and pleasure to the citizens. The games were organized as a means of publicly demonstrating power, as well as a way to enhance the personal reputation of the organizers, whether praetors, consuls, or emperors. If a ruler organized grand games, he demonstrated his ability to govern and care for the people, thereby gaining popular approval. Gladiator games as a political tool for manipulating public opinion. Gladiatorial games also served to shape public opinion and create a positive image of those in power. During these spectacles, spectators could be convinced of the power and ability of the rulers, which gave them the opportunity to enjoy this brutal and, at the same time, spectacular event. Many people came to the games not only to see the battles, but also to feel a connection with the great power of which they were a part. This was especially evident during the imperial period, when the games became part of public diplomacy. For example, Emperor Titus, 79 to 81 CE, staged huge games to celebrate the completion of the Colosseum, to enhance his reputation and demonstrate his ability to be a caring ruler. During this period, it became clear that gladiatorial games had become an important element of state propaganda, used to maintain political stability and maintain power. Manipulating the political implications of games. Games, which were organized not only for entertainment but also for political influence, often had equally profound consequences. They allowed the rulers of Rome to influence the people and affect the behavior of certain social groups. This role of games was especially noticeable during the late Republic, when the competition for popular support between political figures became especially intense. Politicians organized games to attract voters and strengthen their position in the Senate and popular assemblies. The theme of bread and circuses was especially relevant for populist leaders such as Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar, in particular, knew how to effectively use gladiatorial games for political purposes. In 65 BC, when he was an aedile, he organized grand games that greatly improved his popularity with the people. These games not only featured gladiators fighting, but also wild animal hunts and theatrical performances. Caesar spent a lot of money on organizing them, demonstrating his generosity and willingness to provide for the people. Psychological impact on citizens. Gladiatorial games had a strong psychological impact on the people. In Rome, where crowds gathered for mass events, such spectacles served not only to entertain, but also to maintain a certain perception of Rome's greatness. Through these games, politicians created an image of Rome as a powerful, invincible empire, where every citizen was part of a great order controlled by the emperor or other political figures. One of the most important aspects of the games was that their organizers could manipulate the emotions of the spectators, creating a thrilling spectacle for them that distracted them from real problems. For example, if there was unrest or instability in the city, then organizing mass games could calm the people, freeing them from thoughts of worries and unrest. In this context, gladiatorial games became an instrument of psychological warfare, where every gesture, every decision of the rulers mattered. Games as part of political strategy. In addition, the gladiatorial games became an arena for demonstrating Rome's military might. The battles involving wild animals, as well as the fights between gladiators, were fought not only for life, but also to demonstrate the power of Rome as the greatest empire in the world. The principle of victory in the arena echoed imperial ambitions. Each victorious battle became a statement of the empire's might, and thus demonstrated the invincibility and power of Rome. These games were held not only in the capital of the Roman Empire, but also in other provinces, expanding Rome's influence on local cultures and communities. Gladiatorial games in different parts of the empire became a reminder of who wielded strength and power. The decline of gladiatorial games as an instrument of power. However, despite the enormous role of gladiatorial games in Roman politics, their importance began to decline in the last centuries of the Roman Empire. With the rise of Christianity, changing cultural and moral norms, and the emergence of new forms of entertainment and control, gladiatorial games began to lose their popularity. But until the end of their existence, they remained a powerful instrument of political control. Gladiator games as a political instrument were a vital part of Roman culture and politics. They served as a tool for distracting public attention, creating and maintaining an image of Rome's greatness and power, and also as a way to manipulate the masses and strengthen the rulers' positions. These games became not just bloody spectacles, but also an arena where the fates of not only gladiators, but also politicians were decided. Gladiatorial games, once one of the most striking symbols of the grandeur and cruelty of ancient Rome, began to gradually fade and disappear in the last centuries of the empire. These spectacles, which at one time were not just entertainment, but an important political and social tool, eventually lost their popularity and significance. The reasons for this decline were multifaceted and complex, including political and cultural changes, shifts in religious views, and a growing awareness of the value of human life. Let us consider the reasons that led to the end of the era of gladiatorial games. With the change in the political situation in the Roman Empire, and especially with the transition from a republic to an empire, the relationship between the state and the people also began to change. In the early empire, gladiatorial games were used as an important tool to maintain the popularity of emperors and distract the people from social problems, which gave politicians the opportunity to strengthen their power. However, in the later period, with the strengthening of the power of the central emperors, the special need for the support of the people through such spectacles disappeared. By this time, the Roman emperors had already gained absolute power, and public games ceased to be so important for strengthening power. In turn, increasing social mobility, the spread of new cultural and political trends, as well as the internal problems of the Roman Empire, began to shift the focus of public attention. The attitude towards gladiatorial games as a political activity changed, and the spectacles that once served as a mechanism of mass control became less effective and attractive for imperial power. Over the centuries, Roman society underwent cultural changes that eventually led to the decline of the popularity of gladiatorial games. Roman citizens who had become more civilized and educated began to understand the moral and ethical aspects of using people for bloody entertainment. Under these conditions, games that had previously seemed normal began to be perceived as barbaric, cruel, and inhumane. It is also important to note that the influence of Greek philosophy on Roman society, from the late 1st century CE, led to the spread of more humanistic views on life. Philosophical schools such as Stoicism and Epicureanism began to promote the idea of self-control, rationality, and human dignity. These ideas focused on personal freedom, dignity, and respect for human life, stood in direct context with gladiatorial games based on violence and exploitation of life. Attention to human rights and moral issues in culture led to a change in attitude towards gladiatorial combat. One of the most important factors that led to the decline of gladiatorial games was the spread of Christianity in the Roman Empire. The Christian religion, with its principles of love for one's neighbor, mercy, and compassion, had a profound impact on attitudes towards violence and cruelty in society. At the beginning of the 3rd century, Christianity began to spread more actively among the Roman population, and then among the upper classes. This was due to the growing number of Christians in the empire, which in turn affected public sentiment. Christians, who believed that every human life was valuable in the eyes of God, opposed gladiatorial games as a form of unforgivable violence aimed at destroying human life for entertainment. One of the first Christian emperors to actively oppose gladiatorial games was Gratian. In 382, he officially banned the games in his empire. From the 4th century onwards, Christianity finally became the state religion, and gladiatorial games began to be associated with paganism and barbaric traditions. With the rise of Christian values and moral standards, gladiatorial games lost their social and cultural significance. Many Christian preachers began to actively fight against this practice, which also accelerated its decline. An important factor in the decline of gladiatorial games was the economic difficulties of the Roman Empire. Rome experienced hard times in the 3rd to 5th centuries CE, when the empire faced economic crises, resource shortages, and social instability. Hosting large spectacles such as gladiatorial games required huge expenditures, which became increasingly difficult to maintain in the conditions of economic decline. These events also coincided with political upheavals, such as the division of the Roman Empire into East and West, which significantly weakened state resources. Under such conditions, it was much more difficult to organize large-scale games. Funding problems and the decline of the empire's wealth had a decisive impact on the ability to stage spectacles. Roman society also experienced a psychological shift in the perception of human life. With the growth of moral and cultural values, with the development of philosophy and religion, the importance of human life began to be perceived differently. Gladiator games, despite their popularity, began to be associated with tragedy, suffering, and the destruction of human destinies. In a society where views on the dignity of the individual and respect for rights began to strengthen, the games began to be perceived as incompatible with humanism. In 404, Emperor Honorius finally abolished gladiatorial games in the Western Roman Empire, after which they were no longer held on a regular basis. Although the tradition of fighting continued in more localized forms, such games no longer became a mass phenomenon in Rome. With the destruction of the gladiatorial games, an entire era in Roman history disappeared when violence and bloody entertainment served as a way to control the masses. The decline of the gladiatorial games was not just the end of one type of entertainment. It was a symbol of how cultural, political, and religious values were changing in the Roman Empire. It was also a moment when society, amid economic and social crisis, began to recognize that human life had a deeper value than the spectacle of violence for entertainment purposes. Gladiatorial games, once a political tool, became a reminder of the brutality of the past and how history and culture can change over time to reflect new moral compass and values. The life of the Roman elite and the gladiators are two completely opposite worlds that, at first glance, have nothing in common. While the gladiators, who were mostly slaves or the lower classes, were in a constant struggle for survival, the life of the Roman aristocrats and rich people was full of luxury, comfort, and privilege. But this contrast is not limited to material goods. It covers all areas of their existence, from daily practices and leisure to moral guidelines and perception of life. This is a huge gap separating two worlds, two social classes that lived in parallel in one society, but were divided not only by economic barriers, but also by ideological, philosophical, and moral differences. The Roman elite, the wealthy senators, patricians, and influential citizens, lived in the absolute context of the grandeur and power that the Roman Empire provided them. They were masters not only of their homes, but, in most cases, of the lives of others, including slaves, gladiators, and the poorest classes. Their homes and palaces were status symbols, places where luxury was the norm, and labor was completely alien. These palaces, called domus, were luxuriously furnished, with huge courtyards, beautiful gardens, and elaborate architecture. Slender marble columns supported high ceilings, and the walls were decorated with frescoes depicting mythological gods, battle scenes, and other epics that reflected the power of Rome. In these houses there was abundance, not only in material goods, but also in leisure, entertainment, and social gatherings where the most important questions of politics and economics were decided. The life of the Roman elite was filled with holidays, banquets, feasts, which often lasted for many days. These events were not just a time for relaxation, but were also part of a political strategy. Rich senators and aristocrats organized lavish feasts to demonstrate their power, generosity, and care for the people. Only the highest strata of society participated in such events, and this was a way not only to show their power, but also to create political alliances, establish connections, strengthen reputation, and, of course, strengthen power. It was impossible to manage feasts without pleasing the elite, their families, relatives, and allies. Food and drinks, another status symbol. Guests at these celebrations enjoyed extraordinary dishes, many of which were enjoyed only by wealthy Romans. These dishes included not only meat, fish, and wild game, but also exotic foods imported from far corners of the empire. Wine flowed freely, and tables were laden with food. It was not just a gastronomic event, but also a cultural one, part of the Roman ritual that symbolized the carelessness of wealth. For gladiators, life was full of fear, pain, and cruelty. These fighters, many of whom were slaves, were forced to fight not only against their enemies in the arena, but also against their own existence. Their training in the ludi, gladiator schools, was incredibly brutal, filled with merciless practices aimed at creating the perfect killers who were ready to fight in the arena. For gladiators, especially those who were prisoners, every morning began with brutal training, and every evening ended in dark, filthy barracks with no room for rest or comfort. Gladiators had no choice. Their lives depended on their ability to fight, kill, and survive. If they lost or did not please the crowd, they would face a brutal end. Unlike the Roman elite, gladiators had no certainty about the future. Even if they showed heroism and won fights, they could be killed at the request of the spectators if they decided that they had become overfed and were no longer interesting to the public. The physical conditions of the gladiators were deplorable. They were constantly injured by weapons and suffered from diseases resulting from long training and inadequate nutrition. Many gladiators lived in cramped, dirty barracks with no privacy or opportunity to rest. The gladiators' social status was at its lowest. They were deprived of any rights and were completely dependent on their masters. At the same time, most gladiators were forced to fight for freedom that might never come to them. Social inequality between gladiators and the elite at Rome was not limited to material goods. It extended to every aspect of their lives. Elite Romans and gladiators existed in different social worlds, with completely different roles, responsibilities, and prospects. While the Roman elite could enjoy every comfort, dreaming of political power and social prestige, gladiators were simply objects used for the entertainment of the people, without any significance attached to them as individuals. Physical and psychological separation of these strata of society manifested itself not only in their lives, but also in their relationships with others. For the Roman elite, gladiators were just instruments for spectacles, often perceived as pathetic creatures who did not deserve respect. In turn, gladiators, being at the very bottom of the social ladder, most often had no hope for the future. Their bodies were an object of entertainment for the Romans, and their fates were influenced only by the wishes of those sitting in the audience. For the Roman elite, life was about control and power. They could control not only their own destiny, but also the destinies of others. Political alliances, money, and power were what determined their lives. Rome's elite were able to organize feasts, erect statues in their honor, and influence the course of history. Over time, Roman culture began to change, and views on life, death, and violence began to evolve. While Rome's elite continued to enjoy their position, toward the end of the empire, moral shifts began to build, driven by philosophical movements, Christian influence, and social instability. The issues of life and death that were so prominent in gladiatorial games began to be viewed differently. With the rise of Christianity and humanistic movements, the view of man as an individual deserving of respect began to gain popularity, which eventually influenced the rejection of violent spectacles and recreational killings. The process of separation between these two worlds, the world of the elite and the world of the gladiators, gradually led to the gladiatorial games, as a social phenomenon, beginning to fade away. The elite continued to enjoy their privileges, but people like the gladiators became a symbol of the cruelty and ruthlessness of the era, which eventually led to the abandonment of violent spectacles. The life of the Roman elite and gladiators remains an important reminder of how a huge gap between classes can affect the structure of a society and its moral values. The contrast between these worlds was vivid and dramatic, and it is this gap that makes Roman history unique, but also full of tragedy. Roman banquets were not just ordinary dinners, but real cultural and political events, symbolizing the greatness, wealth, and power of the Roman elite. For representatives of high society, such feasts became an integral part of their lives, an opportunity to demonstrate their generosity, promote their interests, strengthen political alliances, and, of course, enjoy the luxury that they could enjoy due to their privileged position in society. Banquets in ancient Rome were events that could last for hours, sometimes even days. During the empire, such feasts became a true art, where food and wine served not only to satisfy physical needs, but also as a means to demonstrate the status of the hosts and their capacity for luxury. These events became an important part of Roman culture, and the Romans themselves used banquets to demonstrate their socio-political power. However, beyond the external splendor, these banquets concealed a complex web of relationships, where every gesture, every treat, and every word was carefully considered. Banquets took place in magnificent houses, decorated to impress the guests. These houses, called domus, were spacious, with many rooms, designed in the best traditions of Roman architecture. The main room for feasts was the refectory, a room designed specifically for receiving guests. Here, the walls were decorated with frescoes, marble columns, and statues, and the floors were covered with exquisite carpets. At banquets, the walls were often lit by oil lamps, creating a soft and intimate light that emphasized the atmosphere of the feast. In the center of the room was the triskin, a round table at which all the guests were seated, sitting on soft sofas, while junior servants served them. Guests at banquets usually sat on couches in a semi-reclining position. This allowed them to relax and enjoy the food and conversation without worrying about discomfort. This way of sitting showed the privileged position of the guests, who did not have to worry about the hardships of the working class. These houses were characterized by an atmosphere of comfort and coziness, and feasts were often accompanied by special music, flutes, lutes, and harps, to further create a sense of peace and relaxation. The sounds of music were intertwined with conversations, laughter, shouts, which made banquets real symphonies of pleasure and wealth. An integral part of every Roman banquet was food, which had nothing in common with the ordinary meals of ordinary Romans. For wealthy Romans, food became an art that they could afford at the most luxurious celebrations. The menu for banquets was very diverse and included dishes that were not found in ordinary homes. First of all, meat dishes were served at feasts: lamb, pork, game, including rare species of birds and exotic animals such as flamingos and peacocks, as well as the meat of wild animals such as deer and wild boar. It was important for wealthy Romans to show their guests that they could afford such luxurious and rare dishes. In addition, the tables often featured a variety of seafood, which was brought from the most remote corners of the empire. This included sea urchins, oysters, fish, as well as exotic gifts such as imported spices from India or Africa. Feasts were also not complete without desserts, which often included honey sweets, fruits, nuts, and even exotic types of honey, which were used to create complex and multi-layered desserts. One of the most beloved treats at feasts was pulpum, sweet bread with honey and nuts. Wine played an important role at Roman banquets. Guests were served drinks that could be very different in taste and strength. Sometimes wine was specially treated, mixed with various spices, honey, or water. Wine at Roman banquets was not just a drink, but a part of social activity. Its consumption was often accompanied by poetry, music, verses, and public speeches. In addition to food and drink, entertainment played an important role at Roman banquets. Banquets always included artists, singers, dancers, musicians, and poets who would perform to entertain the guests. Stage productions, theatrical performances, or even impromptu amusements were also organized at such events. These performances helped to strengthen social ties between guests, and also allowed politicians or nobles to strengthen their social status and popularity. Intellectual games occupied a special place. The Romans often held debates and discussions at feasts, where guests could show off their knowledge and erudition. These cultural events allowed the elite to demonstrate their education, and also served as an opportunity for political maneuvering. But, strangely enough, among all these luxurious pleasures, the banquets also included deadly games, when gladiators could fight for entertainment purposes. This added a special meaning to the event. The death of one fighter became the culmination of the banquet, which allowed the host of the banquets to demonstrate his ability to control the lives of others. Sometimes the owners and organizers of the banquets arranged such spectacles to emphasize their power and cruelty, which was also part of the political game. Banquets and feasts in ancient Rome also had important political significance. They became venues for making deals, forming alliances, and asserting power and influence. Interaction at feasts allowed senators, wealthy citizens, and emperors to strengthen their positions in society by organizing secret negotiations or public demonstrations of their strength and power. This was a form of public diplomacy, where through generosity and lavish celebrations, Rome's political elites could gain support from the people or other influential groups. The banquet became not just an event for relaxation, but also a way to intensify political intrigues, when every gesture and word mattered. While gladiators fought for their lives, here, at the feasts, the fates of entire state and political systems were decided. Roman banquets, where fine food, wine, and cultural entertainment merged into a luxurious atmosphere, seemed far removed from the reality of gladiators. Gladiators who could be captured, forced to fight in the arena, or die in terrible conditions, had nothing to do with the life that wealthy Romans enjoyed. While some enjoyed pleasures and political maneuvers, others literally fought for their lives. Roman banquets were a world of luxury, exquisite pleasures, and political intrigue that left a deep mark on Roman culture with every gesture and glance. These banquets became an arena for the display of power and wealth, while the brutal reality of the gladiators remained in the shadows, hidden from the eyes of those who enjoyed their status and privileges. Gladiators are not just fighters who fight in the arena for the entertainment of the crowd. They are a symbol associated with the very essence of Rome as a great empire. In the history of ancient Rome, their sacrifices and sufferings not only became part of the cultural heritage, but were also an important element of Roman politics, ideology, and social structure. Gladiatorial fights and games were so important to the Romans that they became a symbol of Rome's power, a reflection of its cruelty, and, at the same time, a kind of contract between the rulers and the people. The epic of the gladiators, their presence in the arena, and their struggle for life shaped the collective perception of the Roman Empire and determined how it would be perceived in the future. Gladiators were not just fighters, but also victims of a culture of violence in which the strong often celebrated their power and vitality, while the weak, like gladiators, became instruments of that violence. The fighting that took place in the arenas was part of Roman ideology. Combat became a symbol of both personal and state struggle. These games represented Rome itself, a powerful, brutal, and often merciless empire where death, suffering, and violence were part of the show. On the one hand, gladiators embodied a philosophy of heroism and courage as they fought to their last breath, but on the other, their existence was a painful reminder that the Roman games were a kind of cultural propaganda and an instrument of political power. Gladiators became a means of maintaining order. Their deaths brought satisfaction to the crowd and allowed rulers to demonstrate their power over life and death, reminding the masses who was boss in the Roman Empire. But the games also became an integral part of Roman mass entertainment, linked to imperial politics. With the help of gladiatorial combat, rulers and senators were able to legitimize their rule, ensuring greater support from the population. The fights were a vivid symbol of how the elite used violence and death as a means of controlling the people, distracting them from real problems and strengthening their political power. Gladiators became living metaphors for Roman power and its brutality. Their struggles in the arena reflected the foundations of the Roman social and political structure. Gladiators were slaves or lower classes who sacrificed their lives on the altar of the empire for the pleasure and amusement of the rich and powerful. Their existence and their deaths became part of the ritual of subjugation and oppression, as well as the Roman practice of mass control. The transformation of gladiators into a symbol of Rome was not only physical, they became the personification of a system of cruelty and control, in which victims were needed not only to demonstrate strength and power, but also to assert the incontestability of power. Remember that the moral opposite of the gladiators was the Roman elite, rulers, senators, and wealthy citizens who enjoyed the game of life and death, but remained aloof from the violence itself, limiting themselves to observing it. This not only reveals the callousness of the elites, but also shows how violence in the arena served to strengthen these elites in the eyes of the people. Gladiatorial games serve not only as entertainment, but also as an important tool for political manipulation and propaganda. Emperors used these games as a means of consolidating their power. For example, Caesar, Tiberius, and Caligula staged grand gladiatorial tournaments that allowed them to demonstrate their generosity and power, winning the support of the people. When political issues became tense, or when a ruler sought to consolidate his power, he could stage such spectacles to distract the people from pressing issues. For example, the Emperor Titus staged grand games to celebrate the completion of the Colosseum in 80 CE, demonstrating both the greatness of his reign and his ability to care for the welfare of the people. These games became a symbol of both political power and the ability to manipulate public opinion. For Roman rulers, gladiatorial combat was a way to maintain social order, in which cruelty was perceived as a symbol of stability. The games also showed that Rome controlled not only human life, but also death. The people in the arena saw how rulers could decide who would live and who would die, which added to their respect and fear. This power became an important component of imperial propaganda. When we talk about the legacy of gladiators, we also look at how their memory remained in the culture and symbols of Rome. Gladiators, even after the games ceased, continued to be associated with Rome as an empire in which violence and cruelty became part of the cultural identity. An empire that elevated such games to a cult became for many a symbol of oppression, fear, and power. The memory of gladiators has been preserved in art and literature. Many Roman writers, such as Seneca and Juvenal, often use the image of gladiators to illustrate the degradation of society. The image of the gladiator became an important literary archetype, a symbol of martyrdom and sacrifice, and a reminder of the social differences that divided Roman society. Later, in late antiquity and the Middle Ages, gladiators became characters in myths and stories that preserved the memory of Roman brutality. Gladiatorial games also found their reflection in architecture and art. The Colosseum, Rome's greatest building, was not only an arena for gladiatorial combat, but also a symbol of Rome's power. Even in art, we see images of gladiators, who are often associated with the ideas of courage, strength, but also death. Elements of gladiatorial culture continued to inspire artists, sculptors, and writers throughout history, creating symbolism that is associated with cruelty and, at the same time, martyrdom. What does the legacy of gladiators mean for us today? In a historical context, their sacrifices and the culture of spectacle became a metaphor for broader themes in society, such as violence, power, manipulation, and the idealization of violence. In the modern world, where gladiatorial games have long since disappeared, their memory lives on in various forms of entertainment, such as cinema, gladiator films such as Ridley Scott's Gladiator, video games, such as the popular Roman fighting games, and in sports competitions, where we often see the symbolism of struggle, violence, and victory. Gladiators are now seen as heroes, symbolizing human resilience and the quest for freedom despite the odds. Their tragedy and struggle have become metaphors for contemporary themes, from social struggle and human rights to issues of violence in mass entertainment. Legacy of the gladiators in Roman culture and history was shaped not only by their participation in the games, but also by their image as a symbol of power, cruelty, and unwavering will. Their sacrifices, their tragic path from slavery to death, became an integral part of the Roman imperial identity. This legacy remains part of the world's cultural memory to this day, inspiring us to reflect on social injustice, power, life, and death. When we begin to think about the lives of Roman gladiators and the Roman elite, we often come across how these two worlds contrast greatly, full of fear and luxury, suffering and pleasure. However, despite the obvious differences, there is something common between these worlds that is worth thinking about. It is an unceasing struggle. At some point, each of these people is faced with the need to survive, with the fact that life requires sacrifice and effort from them, whether in the blood and agony of the arena or in the political manipulation and struggle for influence in luxurious palaces. Both worlds, the world of gladiators and the world of the Roman elite, are filled with an inevitable struggle. Think about the life of gladiators, who woke up every morning, and each new day was filled not only with the brutality of training, but also with anxiety for their lives. There was no rest in their world, no certainty about the future. Their existence was linked to constant preparation for the next battle. Every day, every blow, every clash. The fear of death was their eternal companion, and despite this, they continued to fight. What made them move forward, despite the fear, despite the pain? Maybe it was the desire to survive. Maybe it was an inner determination to prove to themselves that they could endure. Every day was a new test, and in this test, the gladiator tried to survive, to find at least a little meaning in what was happening around him. But despite the hardships of their existence, despite the brutal reality in which they existed, gladiators could not have existed without the world that supported them. A world where luxury, power, and politics became no less important than the training and fighting themselves. This world was the world of the Roman elite, where power and wealth defined life and a person could enjoy all the benefits of civilization. But it was precisely in this world that a different kind of struggle was hidden. The elite of Rome, unlike the gladiators, did not fight with weapons, but their struggle for status, for recognition, for power was to a large extent just as painful. In these luxurious palaces, at exquisite banquets, in the closed circles of politicians, senators, nobles, ambitions, intrigues, the struggle for dominance were hidden. The gladiators' resignation to physical pain contrasts with the tension of the elite, who lived in constant fear of falling from the social ladder. Gladiators literally risked their lives, while Rome's elite risked their status, their reputation. In both cases, there was a constant threat. For some, the threat was physical, for others, political and social. But they all experienced fear. They all faced the need to fight. Gladiators were, in essence, pawns, forced to fight in the name of others, becoming instruments in the hands of those who were on the pedestal of power. And yet, these men, despite being deprived of freedom, possessed an inner strength that perhaps those who enjoyed comfort and wealth did not have. In their struggle, in their courage and tenacity, there was not only physical strength, but also a spirit of survival that became part of their being. It was their strength, their unbending determination, that continued to carry them through each new battle, through each new trial. On the other hand, the elite of Rome tried to prove their power and influence through political manipulation and social connections. They could sit in their palaces and enjoy food, wine, endless entertainment, but their life was also a game. It was a game for power, for influence, for social recognition. They used their intelligence, their keen intuition, and strategic thinking to stay on top. But there was no room for relaxation in their lives either. Every day was a battle for survival, for maintaining their privileges, for moving up to the highest levels of society. But despite the outward glamour of the life of the Roman elite, it is important to understand that this life was not free of brutal internal conflicts. Just as gladiators fought for survival in real combat, so Rome's elite fought for their position in this brutal world of intrigue, corruption, and political manipulation. And although their battles were not so obvious and physical, they still required incredible effort, patience, and endless tension. Now that we see the contrast between these worlds, it is worth considering how you personally perceive the struggle in your life. Each of us has our own internal battles, our own gladiators that we face every day. We all face difficulties, moments when we have to fight for something, for happiness, for success, for recognition. And although our battles may not be as physical as those of the gladiators, they can be no less brutal and difficult. Our world has its own arenas, its own training fields where we fight every day. Perhaps the world of the Roman elite and the world of the gladiators remind us of two types of struggle that we may face in life. One is the struggle for physical survival, the struggle for the survival of the body, when every step, every breath is connected with the determination to stay alive. The second is the internal struggle, the struggle for the survival of the spirit, when everything around is filled with intrigue, manipulation, and the struggle for recognition and status. Both of these struggles are important. Both of them require strength, determination, and a willingness to overcome one's own limitations. But we must remember that we are not alone in these battles. We all face the same difficulties as those people we have spoken of, the gladiators and the Roman elite. And each of us has our own arc in this struggle, and each day is a new step towards victory. As you settle into the quiet of the night, consider that your struggle is not just a physical or social challenge. It is a struggle with yourself, with your fears, with your determination, with your desire to move forward despite all obstacles. And let this night bring you peace. Let your mind, like a gladiator, rest from the struggle, and your body be rested and restored. Now that you are ready to relax and go to sleep, remember that your own battles are part of your story. And every day, every new step, is an opportunity to win this war, to survive, despite everything that is happening around you. Good night.